Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Anna. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today we're going to be diving into the colorful and textured world of Maximalist Boho art. Not only is this a fun and vibrant style in its own right, it's also a great style for learning how to use mixed media in your artwork. And just a quick reminder before we get started, if you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you have feedback, please leave a comment. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. It goes a long way in supporting the channel and I really appreciate it. All right, on to materials. You'll want 140-pound cold press watercolor paper, washi tape to frame up your piece. You'll also want some watercolors, preferably with jewel tones. For brushes today, I'm using a number 8 quill brush and a number 14 extended point, but you could use a round brush instead. I've also got a jar of water and a spray bottle for activating pigments. So once we lay down our watercolor foundation, we're going to be doing some stenciling with acrylic paint pens. I've got a few here. I'll go over the different patterns and colors to consider for this piece a little bit later. And finally, we'll be doing a layer with oil pastels, so have a set of those handy. And last but not least, a paper towel to help keep everything tidy. Okay, so making maximalist boho art is all about working in layers. So for our first layer, we are going to lay down a watercolor foundation. And now is a great time to talk a little bit about the colors typically involved in maximalist boho art. Usually for this style, you'll see brilliant jewel tones or bold earthy colors. So I'm going to go with jewel tones. I'm going to use this magenta as well as a sapphire blue and an emerald green. The core of this style is vibrancy and richness, so keep that in mind when you choose your color palette. And I recommend using 2 or 3 colors for your watercolor foundation. Once you pick those out, spritz them with a little water and wait 30 seconds to activate the pigments. Then take your brush, and I like to use a quill brush for this step. So I load it up with water and then I load it up with color like this emerald green here. And I'm just going to roll the brush across the paper. And the result is a natural texture that you can either leave or blend out with a little more water and color. You can also create seamless color transitions by running the sections of color up against one another and letting them bleed together naturally. So this smooth color transition along with the natural textures create a beautiful foundation for a maximalist piece. With the foundation laid, we'll let this dry and then move on to some structural watercolor strokes. Now for my piece, I've chosen a deeper green because that's going to add depth and also pop off the background. And full disclosure here, I'm just playing with my extended point brush because I'd never used it before and I wanted to see what it could do. While I figured that out, let's talk a little bit about the overall design and motifs that were typically present in early 20th century maximalist Bohemian art, because that'll give us jumping off points to fuel our own composition. So one of the main influences for this style was French Art Nouveau, and that style utilized a lot of nature motifs, flora, fauna, celestial bodies, and when it came to design, you'd see elegant, elongated line work. And you'll notice that for my structural watercolor strokes, I've created these elongated vining lines with elegant S-curves, and now I'm just adding some alternating elongated leaves to either side of each vine. And that's just something to keep in mind when you're creating your composition. Think about the watercolor as, again, setting your foundation and cradling your design. Then you can think about the other layers of mixed media we're going to be using as embellishments to add richness to the artwork. I'm going to finish up this watercolor layer with some delicate blades of grass, let it dry, and then we can move on to stenciling. Now for our stenciling, we're going to be using acrylic paint pens, and I like to use acrylic paint pens because they're pretty good for precision and they dry pretty quickly. And the stencils I've chosen are actually callouts to 2 other influences that were really popular in classic Maximalist boho art. One of those influences was Middle Eastern textile patterns. So this 8-point star stencil that I'm using here, that was a foundational geometric shape often found in those textile patterns. So it works perfectly here. And it ties into those celestial themes that I mentioned before in the French Art Nouveau movement. Now to integrate this pattern into my composition, I'm going to lay down a couple of mid-sized clusters like this one. And then I'll probably scatter a few singular stars around the composition. And I'm doing that because adding a block of stars as a whole gives the pattern visual weight, but adding the singular stars here and there blends it with the rest of the elements in the piece. And right now, I'm not quite sure where I want to add all those blocks and singular stars. So to kind of get a better feel for that, I'm going to start outlining my leaves and making texture lines that follow the curves of my vines. I should also mention that I'm using gold for the stars and the outlines because gold is just a fantastic way to add richness to any piece instantly. And that's true of pretty much any metallic detail you might add. Gold works particularly well with the specific colors I'm using today because they're cooler jewel tones, so the warm gold metallic pops off the background. If I were using warmer reds and oranges, I'd probably opt for silver because that would create a little more contrast. So that's just something to consider when you're selecting your colors for layering. I'm going to finish up with the stars, vines, and leaves, and then I'll check in again when it's time to move on to our next stencil. Okay, the stars, vines, and leaves are looking good. So we're going to move on to our next stencil. And this stencil is a call out to another major influence in Maximalist Boho art that you saw in the early 20th century, and that is Eastern European folk art. And I'm just going to do one simple row of three in the bottom third of the piece. This creates a visual anchor. And I've done them in red because that really pops off the green in the background and it provides a high contrast, high visibility focal point. So your eyes are automatically drawn down, and then the vines and grasses kind of draw your eye up and guide you through the piece. All right, moving on from the stencils, we are going to play with some oil pastels. Now for these, I'm going to use colors that, will stand off the background a little bit, but it's going to be a lot more subtle. So I'm going to be using muted yellows, oranges, and pinky purples. The contrast is created more by the texture than it is by the color. So they'll still stand out, but it won't be as loud as like the red tulips at the bottom of the piece. And a really great trick for working with oil pastels is to establish a base color and then build on top of it. So with this first flower, for example, I've created a rounded off area with darker muted yellows. And now I'm making broken concentric circles to fill up the area. And that kind of creates these loose petal structures. And I'm going to go over them one more time just to make those petal structures a little more pronounced. And then to blend them with the vines, I'm going to take my gold acrylic pen and just do a broken outline around each petal. The layered colors and textures create a subtle depth that catch the eye and kind of act as stepping stones to draw your gaze from the bottom up. Now let's go over how to make these blossoms one more time. I'm creating a base layer with my darker muted oranges and I'm blending it with my finger, rounding it out. Then I'm making broken concentric circles for my petal structures with a lighter pastel color. And then finally outlining those petal structures with broken gold outlines. I'm going to go ahead and do a few more of these on the other side. I will check back in again when it's time to do some final detailing. Okay, the blossoms are looking good and this composition is shaping up nicely. I just want to add a few more gold details to kind of fill in things a little bit. So I'm going to start right above the tulips and add a crescent moon. There's kind of a rough watermark here anyway, so I'm going to cover it up with some gold detailing. I will say working with mixed media is actually pretty beginner friendly because if you have an opaque medium that you're using, like a paint pen or pastels, it is pretty easy to cover up little mistakes you might have made, and it's no big deal. And here I'm just adding some broken lines trailing out of my 8-point stars. Kind of looks like stardust. It connects the top and the bottom of the piece and just ties everything together. And with that, this Maximalist Boho art piece is complete. Let me know in the comments if you're going to give it a try. As always, thank you so much for creating with me today. Until next time, take care.